This House is in session. Prior to the suspension on yesterday's date, this House was in Standing Finance Committee. We returned to Standing Finance Committee.
This House is in Standing Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Head 81, Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources, in the amount of $126,395,504.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg your leave to invite the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, together with the officials of the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources, into the Well of Parliament.
So granted. Good morning to this Honourable House, Minister and team of the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources. Before you proceed with your opening comments, Minister, let me, for you, a reminder, and for members of your team, let me inform you of the process that obtains for this session. The Minister has 10 minutes to give her opening comments, and thereafter 5 minutes to answer any question that is posed from the floor of the House. The members of the team who may be so directed to respond to any question would have 3 minutes to respond, but prior to doing so, you give your name and the job title. Once you're speaking for the first time, thereafter, you can just begin to speak. Honorable members are aware that your questions, the minister, should not exceed 3 minutes. That is, of course, you are allowed preamble, but you determine whether you're going to ask a question or you're going to make comments, and those comments are up for 3 minutes. We look forward to a very engaging session today. Honorable Minister, you may proceed with your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allow me first of all to introduce the persons who are joining me in the well this morning, representing the Ministry of Transport Works and Water Resources. I have been able to work with a very distinguished team of individuals, of professionals, and therefore I've asked them to join us this morning to answer a number of the questions relating to the estimates. With me, I have the Parliamentary Secretary with responsibility for water resources, Dr. Rommel Springer, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Mark Cummins, the Chief Technical Officer, Mrs. Cheryl Bennett Innes, the General Manager of the Barbados Water Authority, Mr. Keith Roy Halliday, Mr. Fabian Wharton, the Chief Executive Officer of the Transport Board, Mrs. Ruth Holder, Director of the Transport Authority, Mr. David Wright, the Chairman of the Barbados Water Authority, Mr. Rene Butcher, Chairman of the Transport Board, Mrs. Marie Theodore, Chairman of Transport Authority, Mr. Philip Tudor, the Deputy Chief Technical Officer, Operations at MTW, Mr. Charles Yearwood, the Senior Technical Officer of the Drainage Unit, Mr. Tyrone White, the Chief Electrical Officer of the Government Electrical Engineering Department, Mr. Jason Bowen, the Deputy Chief Technical Officer of Design Services, Mr. Virgil Knight, the Chief Licensing Officer, Mrs. Linda Holder, Chief Operations Officer of Transport Board, Ms. Diane Spencer, the Senior Mechanical Engineer, Ms. Denise Smith, Finance Officer, Dr. John Mwanza, Advisor to the Barbados Water Authority, Mr. Charles Leslie, Director of Engineering, Ms. Shelley Paris, the Project Manager at Barbados Water Authority, Ms. Trika McCarthy Brooms, the Deputy Chief Licensing Officer at the Barbados Licensing Authority, and Mr. Dave Scanterbury, the Deputy Chief Technical Officer for Projects at MTW. That, Mr. Chairman, is the team. Allow me, first of all, to indicate that I've had the pleasure of being able to lead this ministry over the past year. I've been ably assisted by the Parliamentary Secretary, Dr. Rommel Springer, who has been shadowing, as you know, the area of water, a very critical resource for this country, and to whom I will give the opportunity in my opening presentation to also address the chamber, because I believe that with the responsibility that he has for this critical resource, that he must also be able to weigh in in giving early remarks. I have also had the fortune of having the guidance from the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Mark Cummins, who is to my left, and also the Deputy Permanent Secretaries, Mr. Skinner and Mr. Webster. And I'm grateful to the entire team at the Ministry of Transport Works and Water Resources, all of the persons who operate within the depots, the officials at the Transport Board, the Transport Authority, the Licensing Authority, the Drainage Unit, and the Barbados Water Authority, whose professional, technical, and institutional knowledge of the roads, the drainage, the transport infrastructure, and the water network, the licensing department, the electrical and building standards, as well as traffic management, have provided both the member for St. Andrew and myself with the expertise and the experience that has been necessary to help us to continue the mandate of this administration. Allow me also to recognize the work of my predecessors, because this is one of the ministries where we have had you, certainly Mr. Chair, serving in the capacity as a minister within the ministry. We have also had the benefit of the member for St. Michael West Central, as well as the honourable member for St. John, and the honourable member, my senior minister for Christchurch West as well. And for a short stint, the member for Christchurch East would have had the opportunity to cover water. And I would mention sewage as well, sir, because that is the challenge that we had when we first came to office in 2018. And he did an admirable job in removing sewage, certainly from the South Coast. Each of us has sought to continue in large measure the transformational initiatives of our predecessors, while also embarking on the restructuring and the transformation of the overall ministry in order to make it fit for purpose. The work of MTW touches the lives of almost every single Barbadian, and I think it is fair to say that the wish list of all of the members, certainly in this chamber, is no different to any of the average Barbadians in this country. But the truth is that we do not operate within a vacuum, and we therefore have to work within the limited fiscal space that we have. We also have to do so while at the same time trying to deconstruct and to reconstruct a ministry that perhaps has had some challenges over the years, or even some bad practices of being able to fulfill its obligations. And therefore, we are also grappling with how to use those very limited resources in order to battle also with the issues of climate change and to make the ministry more responsive. In this year's estimates, we have presented expenditure for this financial year in the sum of $153.6 million. This represents a reduction of $25 million from the $179 million, which was approved in the revised estimates in this financial year. The largest increase is seen in the road rehabilitation, or the CAF program, which has been allocated in this year's estimates $27 million, which is an increase from $20 million from this financial year. You will also see increases in the sub-programs which cover the metered and the non-metered street lighting, and also the building out of critical bridge and road infrastructure. Also, we have addressed the issue of the additional supervisory services for the Scotland District and the Complant project. We have also allocated funds to assist with traffic improvement projects, signage, and also road safety. You will also notice, Mr. Chairman, that there will be a decline in expenditure this financial year as a result of the end of the National Beautification Program, or what has traditionally been referred to as the ASH workers. I would have indicated a few months ago that we were bringing the program to an end and seeking to transition those workers. And we are also very much focused on reducing as well the transfers to the state-owned enterprises as a result of the work which is being done to bring about reforms of those particular institutions. Mr. Chairman, within the last year, a large part of the ministry's attention has been focused on executing its road rehabilitation program. By May of this year, we would have spent $24.4 million to complete 7 global roads under the IDB Road Rehabilitation and Improving Connectivity of Road Infrastructure project. And the other 2 global roads, one at Highway 6 from the Henry Ford roundabout to Searles roundabout, and the other, the Ermy Bourne Highway Phase 2 from Barclays Park to Belle Plaine, are expected to be completed by May of this coming financial year. The sum of $1 million is therefore allocated in order to facilitate the completion of this project. Under the $100 million Latin American Development CAF program, we would have already spent $7 million in this financial year, with works either to be completed or in some cases now to commence. And some of those areas, I think work in Rockdunda has started, Fustic Village, Passage Road, and I believe Yorkshire is soon to be commenced as well. We've also been exploring new technologies in road building. The ministry cannot remain static, particularly in light of climate change. And therefore, in this coming financial year, we will be introducing a new technology known as roller compacted concrete, which will allow us to construct roads, which are hopefully will last longer. In some cases, they're estimated to last about 30 to 40 years, based on the studies that we've seen overseas, but also on our personal visits as well. And this is all intended to allow us not simply to just do roads for the sake of doing roads, but simply to ensure that we do not have to keep going back at roads all the time to rehabilitate. Some of the funds under the CAF program will be allocated to Highway 7, which is the South Coast road, in this coming financial year. And the Chief Technical Officer and her team are currently meeting with the utility companies with a view to being able to move in the direction of sending out requests for proposals. A total of 27 million, as I said earlier, is budgeted for this financial year. This ministry would have signed the framework agreement with the Exim Bank for the sum of Barbados $230 million at the interest rate of 2% back in February of 2022, with an intention to rehabilitate 179.9 kilometers of roads in the Scotland district. The past few months, we have spent the time working very closely with the Chinese contractors, the Complant team, in order to progress the work on 2 of the sample roads. I'm pleased to indicate that Shori Village has now been completed, and apart from the removal of the electrical road, electrical pole, I am told by my colleague, the member for St. Andrew, that the residents are certainly happy, and those that traverse the area. That project came in at about 1.4 million. Works at Vaughan's Road, number 2, have also started, and the technical teams have been working assiduously to be able to get the designs completed and to start the work for White Hill. And I'm therefore pleased to inform this chamber that we are in the process of publishing the Section 3 notices for the acquisition of several parcels of land in the White Hill area, which would allow us to start the construction of phase 1 of the roads at White Hill. It is expected that this process will commence in terms of the reconstruction of the road, the phase 1, as soon as we are able to get that publication completed by the Ministry of Housing. I therefore want to take this opportunity as well, Mr. Chairman, to thank publicly the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, because he has been shepherding the works in White Hill, not biased at all, even though that is the constituency he represents. But I think that there has been significant neglect over the years in this particular community, and he has been able to sit in with the technical teams to help to push to ensure that we are way further than we have ever been in relation to the immense work that has to be done within the Scotland district, and in particular in the area of White Hill. Design work has also commenced on King Street in St. Simon, St. Andrew, as well as Glen Burnie in St. John, and preliminary design work is ongoing for the Thompson Bridge and at Highway F. We have had, as you can appreciate, Mr. Chairman, to phase the works. This project will take a few years for us to complete, and we've had to spend the time in this preliminary stage working with the contractors, with the technical team, to be able to drill down the priority areas. We recognize that we cannot simply close off roads or inconvenience people within these communities who have already been inconvenienced, I might add. And we therefore are trying to minimize the disruption that we know is likely to be caused by the volume of work that we have to do within the coming months. Like the rest of the world, the Chinese team has obviously been impacted by COVID. They had some challenges as well being able to get their teams to Barbados because of the issues of COVID in their homeland. But we're working on getting the designs done, completing all of the engineering studies so that we can embark on an aggressive road rehabilitation program in this financial year in the Scotland district. I'm mindful that Barbadians just simply want to get their roads fixed, and I share that sentiment as well, but I want to assure the country and certainly this chamber that before these works can be carried out, that we have to dot our I's and cross our T's, because the Scotland district is of a particular character and nature in terms of the type of soil that we are dealing with. And therefore, there are a number of tests that have to be carried out, a lot of geotechnical tests, hydrogeological tests. We have to do borehole testing, DCP tests, in order to be able to ensure that what we put down is not only going to last, but it's going to last for a long time, given the nature of the area. With respect to the tenantry and the other residential roads, the ministry through its depots have been working on the pothole patching, and in the coming financial year, we will be working on a special project to develop roads which are no longer than 100 meters in length, and this will be in the rural areas as well as the urban tenantries. These are the roads in the villages and across communities that when it rains, it is almost impossible to get in and out of one's house. We've already allocated 3.2 million in this current financial year to be able to purchase equipment, and we have started to move a lot of the milling material from the airport and to the specific location and start the assessment of the roads that need to be done as well. And these roads, as you can appreciate, will have to have the appropriate drainage. The slip and curb will also have to be done. Mr. Chairman, the reality, when I add up the total of what is allocated in this financial year, quite apart from the monies that will be spent within the Scotland district, as I said earlier, we have 27 million that we've allocated on the CAF, but we're looking at almost a total of $40 million simply allocated between tenantry roads, highway construction, residential roads, or bridges, completing the IDB program, and obviously the CAF program as well. This, Mr. Chairman, is a significant expenditure. I think at the last St. Peter Speaks, many may recall one of the officers were impressed by the Prime Minister indicating that we have really not seen this amount of money being invested in our road infrastructure for a number of years. We also are mindful that several of the areas that we are receiving a lot of the complaints were neglected by a previous administration. And I will not sit here, Mr. Chairman, and not raise this issue, not to go back in the past, but simply to indicate to the country that with 30 seats, our responsibility is to ensure that we're able to prioritize the works that we have on our rehabilitation program and not simply to cherry pick where work is done. In many cases, the areas like the Scotland District and others were represented by Barbados Labour Party representatives, and you yourself, Mr. Chairman, is well aware of what I speak. The reality is that we are seeing a deterioration of that infrastructure across the country, and it has meant that we've had to reprioritize a lot of the funds that would otherwise have been allocated for other areas. Mr. Chairman, separate and apart from the funds under the Scotland District to carry out the work on 8 bridges, we've also allocated 2.1 million to the construction of Dodds Bridge. And this is notwithstanding works that are already ongoing at Pye Corner and certainly at Bawden's Bridge in St. Andrew. And I mention this, Mr. Chairman, as well, because little or no work had been done on a number of our bridges for several years. In terms of maintenance, I think this is obviously a perennial problem across ministries. But we had a report that was done back in 1985 by a group called Island Engineering Group. And they had looked at the bridges and the culverts in the parishes of St. Andrew, St. Joseph, St. John, and St. Thomas. We have recently updated that report because despite what is happening in the Scotland District, I think that we have a responsibility to put in place a maintenance program that is going to allow us in the short term to be able to clear the areas around the bridges, check to ensure that they are safe for both pedestrians and for vehicular traffic, but also to start our own rehabilitation of those works over a period of time. We have also been looking as a ministry at the sites where we have a number of accidents, and we've been seeking to improve the signage as well at a number of junctions in order to improve the general flow of traffic, and in some cases to minimize injury or even death. This year, we will commence the acquisition and construction of a roundabout at the Grays, Brighton, and Windsor area at a cost of 3.8 million, and we recognize at this particular junction that we've had about 40 collisions between 2018 and 2020, and more recently in 2022 there was a mass casualty there involving 25 persons. Again, there are other areas, and we have sought to prioritize, again within the ministry, the areas that we are constantly seeing these types of accidents so that we are in a position to respond to some of the concerns of the public. While we know, Mr. Chairman, that major emphasis is on the condition of the roads, maintenance also extends to signage infrastructure, and we recently launched the National Signage and Street Infrastructure Project, which was to address the condition of road signage, first with an audit being done to assess the condition of the signage in the island. We've got 2 teams working over a period of 8 weeks, and it is our hope that in the next financial year coming, that we will be able to cover the cost of the signage that needs to be replaced, but also move within the communities, because I think that will give an opportunity to residents within communities who may be creative to start to look at community signage as well. The other project that is in the wings for the next financial year is a project called the Fix Barbados Community Engagement App. We already received from not just members in this chambers, but all Barbadians, obviously comments in many circles regarding concerns regarding the road conditions. We feel that we have to be able to collate that information in a way that it allows us to respond. And so while we have had the visual of the app, the demonstration to the team, what we've been working on is how do we respond, how do we make sure that people appreciate that we have recognized the concern that has been raised, but also that you can see timelines within which the ministry intends to fix it, or that we can update the public as to what challenges there are. And again, this is just another way of the ministry being able to use the available technology to be more responsive to a public that is clearly asking for us to be more responsive. I want to mention as well that while we are embarking on these ambitious road programs, we have also been focusing on the institutional strengthening. And through the IDB project, some of the funds would have been allocated to enable us to do the roads, but a large part of those funds have also been allocated to helping the technical teams within the ministry to have the studies done to be able to improve the areas that are necessary within the ministry that need to be strengthened. So whether it is capacity or professionals that require to be brought in, or even technology, some of those funds will be used and have been used to be able to improve and to strengthen the capacity within the ministry. I want to also mention, Mr. Chairman, that while we have been embarking on these programs, we've also recognized that our legislation is in need of a comprehensive overhaul. Particularly, we have the Highways Act that dates back to the 1900s. The last amendment was in 1945. There are some fines within the legislation that are around $10. And I think that it has crippled the ability of the ministry to also be responsive where people are doing things on the roads that they ought not to do. And therefore, we've asked the legal team to begin the process of looking at overhauling the legislation and bringing it into the 21st century. Also, the Road Traffic Act, as you know, has gone through several iterations. It is probably one of the most updated pieces of legislation that comes before this chamber. And because of that, we have recognized that, you know, every time that we make a change, we are constantly having to go back and make an amendment. And therefore, there is in process also a review of that particular piece of legislation. And the other piece that we have been looking into as well is the stormwater management, or what would have been previously referred to as the prevention of floods. Because drainage, I'm sure, is on the tip of the tongues of not just the members in this chamber, but outside. And we recognize that we have to know, particularly in light of climate change, move towards looking at how we manage stormwater as opposed to just trying to prevent a flood. And therefore, our thinking is different in terms of the way forward. And equally, we now need to have legislation that reflects the changes that need to be made. This year, in addition to the work that we have been doing in a number of districts to alleviate the flooding, we will continue to focus on the flood mitigation measures. Out of the rubbing shoulders, we've had a lot of areas identified that perhaps either were already within the ministry or perhaps have been drawn to the attention of the officers. And in particular, I remember at the Christchurch Speaks, the area of Dover and St. Lawrence Gap West was an area that was of particular concern. You will see in this year's estimates the sum of $500,000 budgeted to be able to address this particular flood-prone area. And we are also working on a number of the other areas that have been identified from those comments that have come in. In the last financial year, we were able to issue contracts for 52 wells. I mentioned the well contracts because it is important to appreciate that in order to prevent flooding, that we obviously have to ensure that our wells are properly cleaned. We have had some challenges as it relates to persons coming forward to do some of the well cleaning work, and we've continued to make the call to persons to do so. We've seen an increase, but we continue to allocate money to be able to improve the cleaning of wells across the country. We're also, for the drainage unit, investing in 2 additional pump trucks to pump off the water when we have heavy rains, because I think everybody is well aware that we are getting heavier rainfall for shorter periods of time within the last few months as well. We've worked closely, Mr. Chairman, with the the vulnerable groups. We have tried to improve for persons living with disability a number of ramps and also parking spaces across the city. And we're in the process of rolling out through the licensing authority an electronic vehicle registration system, which my predecessors would have started, but which we are now a lot closer in the pilot stage to being able to bring to reality. As it relates to the state-owned enterprises, Mr. Chairman, and I'm winding down now, the Transport Authority, I can indicate to the Chamber that we are shortly going to be taking to Cabinet the certified regulations from CPC, which will help us to regulate the public service vehicles. That has been a cry for some time, and I am in the process of working with Transport Authority for us and the association certainly to be able to help us to roll that out. As it relates to Transport Board, we will be receiving the buses, the 10 buses that we are acquiring in November of this year, initially scheduled for June, but we've had some setbacks. So by November of this year, we will have those buses. And we are also looking at an additional 20 buses being ordered as well to complement the fleet as well. I am therefore going to hand over to the Parliamentary Secretary, a member for St. Andrew, who, as I said earlier, has been shadowing the area of the Barbados Water Authority. Just to say, Mr. Chairman, that part of the mandate of this ministry for this financial year will be the reform of our state-owned enterprises. And therefore, if we are going to continue to reduce the operating expenses, it is imperative that these estimates obviously reflect a change in the mindset in terms of what we spend on and how we spend on it in order to make sure that people have access to water. Member?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Over the years, the BWA has spent significant sums of money to ensure that Barbadians have access to clean drinking water. This is within a context where the non-payment of water bills has been a perennial challenge. The moratorium on disconnecting non-paying customers implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic has also exacerbated the problem to where accounts receivable have risen to nearly 100 million. This has placed a tremendous strain on the BWA and its ability to carry out a number of its obligations. But even as we assiduously try to address these issues, this has not prevented the BWA from carrying out its mandate or from undertaking a number of projects aimed at alleviating the water concerns of Barbadians across the island. The BWA has a network comprising of 2,500 kilometers of water mains varying from 3 to 20 inches in size and up to 150 years in age. Because of the fragile nature of the pipes, non-revenue water, or NRW, which refers to water that the BWA does not receive any money for, is a major concern for the authority. Currently assessed as being between 36 and 40% of the water pump, this has caused the Barbados Water Authority to engage, this amongst other things, has caused the Barbados Water Authority to engage in a strategic mains replacement program with the intention of replacing most of its network over a period of about 10 years to ensure that there's a reduction in leaks to the system. In the north of the island, the BWA has been confronted with challenges with the supply of water to areas mainly in the parishes of St. Lucie and in St. Peter. These challenges mainly stem from 3 conditions, and those are water supply, water storage, and water quality. And I will address water quality first. Discolored water, or brown water as is sometimes called, this mainly results from the buildup of rust on the interior of the pipelines. Since most of the metallic pipelines that are currently installed were installed in the early 1900s, they did not have the protective coating or the cement lining that you will see in today's pipes to protect them from corrosion. So a lot of these pipes are susceptible to the buildup of rust on the inside. And what eventually happens is that rust separates from the interior of the pipelines and is carried along in the water, causing that brownish discoloration. Another major concern highlighted in the north is the lack of steady water supply or water outages. And I should say now that Barbados is at 98% of the maximum extraction rate for groundwater. And that is why we would have had to increase the number of desalination plants on the island. Compounding this fact is climate change, which is resulting in decreased availability of fresh water. And this also has impacted the BWA's ability to pump from some of the well sources due to increased salinity levels or saltiness in the water. And nowhere is this more visible than on the west coast and in the north of Barbados, where a number of wells had to be taken out of service because of increased salinity. And to make matters worse, the severity of annual drought-like conditions is expected to continue, with 2015 and 2019 being counted amongst the worst since 1947. The recent years 2021, 2020, and 2022, just last year, have not given us enough confidence or shown enough evidence to suggest that we are in recovery mode or that recovery is imminent. All of which have caused the BWA to be very intentional and strategic in their response. And as such, a multi-pronged approach have been adopted to resolve the issues impacting the country by first addressing the most critical of these issues and then drilling down on the less critical. I want to look briefly at some of the measures that the BWA has put in place to address the many concerns that we have gotten. As aforementioned, the BWA has implemented its island-wide strategic main replacement program. This is an initiative wherein prioritized strategic replacement of water mains will take place across the island. And you have seen it started in places like St. Lucie and in St. Peter, where there are frequent reports of outages, bursts, and discoloration of water. It is projected that approximately 120 kilometers of water main replacement will be accomplished in this particular program. A number of mains in the areas of Lamberts and Boscobel have already been completed, and there's ongoing work in Lowland, St. Lucie, in Checker Hall, Content, Broomsfield, Crab Hill, Greenwich, Bright Hall, Connaughton, Retreat, Flatfield, and I hope all of these are areas that have either started or will soon commence work. I believe, based on conversations I would have had with the Honourable Member, that he has already seen some evidence of improved water quality in the north, and the same can be applied for the Honourable Member for St. Peter. In total, we have already completed 11 kilometers of mains, and this has been done at a cost of approximately $11 million. In other words, it takes about $1 million to change a kilometer of main, of pipe. In addition to the discoloration from the rusting pipelines, there's some discoloration from sediment entering the Allendales well, which is the main well that feeds the water systems in the north. And the BWA is in the process of procuring a filtration system to alleviate the discolored water problems. And this is expected to cost the BWA $460,000, and that work is expected to be completed by June of this year. As it relates to water supply, a number of short-term measures have been utilized by the BWA, and these include the deployment of community tanks, which is by no means an ideal solution, but we have had to resort to it, as well as the provision of personal water tanks to persons in districts that are affected by persistent water outages. And you would have seen the proliferation of these water tanks, and along with pumps in the northern part of the island, more so. The BWA, with the support of the unions, has also implemented an extended work-hour program, which covers the majority of the critical times during the day for the operation of the water tank fleet. So basically what has happened is that persons have been allowed to work extended hours to ensure that those tanks and those community tanks in areas impacted by water outages, as well as those persons who need water bring directly to their homes, that there are always resources in place, there are always persons in place, trucks in place to come and cover those areas. In order to build further resiliency and address persistent problems with the low pressure and outages, the BWA has sought to increase the availability of additional water through the establishment of containerized desalination plants using both brackish water and seawater at 2 sites in St. Lucie, namely Hope and Colleton. And it's anticipated that with the increased production in the north, with these 2 systems, water production will double in the north from 1.2 imperial million gallons not double, but to increase from 1 million to 1.2 imperial million gallons. Further afield, the BWA has improved the redundancy of storage in the island by the construction of a further 5 concrete water storage tanks at a cost of $26 million to increase water supply resilience and to reduce overall outages for customers right across the island. And these were constructed in Casa Grande. You would have seen Rising Sun. There's one in Ipsel that was recently completed, and I've seen how rapidly the one in Short Hill is going up, so that should soon be completed. But it's expected that all of these tanks will be completed by August 31st, 2023. At the same time, there have been a number of infrastructural upgrades in the area of main replacements, outside of the north, of course, and some areas of note would be Vaughan's Road in St. Joseph, where we have installed 700 meters of 4-inch pipe. We have seen the main installation for St. Stephen's to Lodge Hill, for the St. Stephen's to Lodge Hill project, and that is at around 95% complete, which is about around 1.3 kilometers of 20-inch main. We've seen the construction of the Grand View Reservoir and tanks at Mount Stepney and Ellerton. Ongoing construction of a new pumping station at Warley's in St. Peter is also being done. This will facilitate the transfer of water from that Warley's pumping area into the Rock Hall distribution system, where we have had some challenges in the past. And there's also ongoing work to upgrade the pumping station at Lancaster St. James. And this is just to name a few of the projects that are ongoing. There's also the water augmentation project for the St. Michael catchment area, where we are drilling to explore for new sources of water for mainly that Christchurch Dome area, where we are feeling a challenge in terms of supply. And additionally, this should be good news for the member for St. Lucie. We are also doing some drilling of boreholes to evaluate the groundwater catchment in Mount Poya and in the Broomfield area, mainly to supply the farming community in that area with water. That project is estimated to cost $1.1 million, and we are hoping to complete that by June 30th of this year. There's also a planned upgrade for the Groves pumping station in St. Philip. And this is a system that was designed back in 2012 to produce just around 11,000 cubic meters of water a day. But with the explosion of the population in St. Philip, that can no longer adequately supply the needs of persons in that area. Plus, it has also been used to supply water to the Vineyard and Sunbury as well, to those stations. So we are looking to upgrade that at a cost of $500,000. As it relates to wastewater, we are also undertaking a number of wastewater projects. Plans are in place to upgrade both the sewage treatment plants at Bridgetown and at the South Coast to tertiary level treatment plants, for which we have received financing, certainly for the Bridgetown treatment plant through a grant for $80 million from funding from the Green Climate Fund. Also, for the first time in years, the BWA is seriously pushing ahead with the installation of soaring solutions in districts like Bellevue, Beltentry, Bailey's Alley, and Chapman Lane in the city. And though we are still at the planning phase, we are still far more advanced in terms of where we are now than where we have ever been in the past. So that is something that those members in the city and in the Bell area can look forward to. Also, the member for St. George can also look forward to that. Another project not funded by government but expected to be undertaken this year is the procurement of a standby generator at the Spring Garden desalination plant. This will cost roughly $6 million, as well as splitting of the power supply to that plant so that parts of the plant can be isolated in the event that there's a need for maintenance. We can isolate aspects of that plant. And as you all know, that desalination plant services a vast number of persons right across Barbados, as far as St. James, well into the St. Peter area, I'm sure. So you can imagine the capacity of that plant and the need to have it running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we are putting measures in place to ensure that we never have to close down that plant. And even if there's a power outage, there's capacity there for the plant to continue to function in the event. And this would become even more important if we were to be faced with a system, a hurricane or storm. So as I close, I want to reiterate the BWA's commitment to its mission, which is to provide safe, reliable, and sustainable water and wastewater services, whilst ensuring customer satisfaction, and our commitment to Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which calls for the universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water, adequate, equitable sanitation, and hygiene for all, and improved water quality. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Andrew. Chairman, I thank you for the latitude that you've given to us. Obviously, this ministry is very vast in terms of the areas that it touches, and so I truly appreciate the opportunity to be able to allow both the Parliamentary Secretary and myself to give a general overview of the areas that we believe are critical to the infrastructure of this country. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Minister and Parliamentary Secretary. It has been an expansive overview, and there's a lot of food for thought. There are some good things that I've heard too. So let me compliment you for that. And I see members they seem to be raring to go. So this seems set for a very good discussion today, but I just want to caution members, work with me in terms of your times, etc., or I will work with you. So to get the ball rolling this morning, Honourable Member for St. John.
Chair, you're throwing curveballs. Good morning, thank you. I have 3 short questions, all related to an area that I know well. The first one, Minister, is there a policy on rotating staff at the depots across the island? My first. You want all 3 one time, or you want me to come back?
No, that's fine. On rotating staff, having spent some time, Minister, in the ministry, I'm sure you are asking a question to which you already know the answer to. So I will simply say, to some extent, yes, staff are rotated. I'm not sure if your question is in relation to staff who are creating challenges at a particular depot, or if it is just a case of whether we are moving staff so that they have better experiences at different depots. Because, for instance, if you're working in the Scotland district, those issues there are completely different to the issues in the city. So I'm not sure if where your question is going, and maybe you might want to clarify, but I would say yes, to some extent, the staff are rotated, but at the same time, it may depend on what the genesis of your question is coming from, or the position that you're coming from.
That's good enough for me. My second question, in a different life, I know when drawings are submitted to tongue and country planning, they then are distributed to different agencies for approval. I have a situation in my constituency where one lady is looking to apply for water, and it is a case where she's being told she cannot get a supply because of the zone. Now, this is not a new development. This is one person in the community, and I'm familiar that in some cases a septic tank along with a filter bed can be used to facilitate a situation like that. Now, in this same community, there are suck wells, there are pit toilets, but I have one person who is unable to get a supply because she's being told that the zone would prohibit her from getting water. I think that this is, one bucket of water don't cause a flood, and I don't see how one household can impact in such a significant way that she can't get a water supply.
Yeah. Thank you, Minister. I'm going to ask Charles Leslie to perhaps address you in relation to the issue of zoning. As I think you are aware, we have made some progress in relation to this area. There is a paper that has been gone before Cabinet, has been approved, and we are in the process of fine-tuning it because we had to go back to make some changes in terms of the desalination zones and other zones. But I will ask Mr. Leslie to perhaps address you in relation to these specific concerns, because I suspect the person is in a Zone 1 area.
Good morning, Ms. Speaker. My name is Charles Leslie from the Barbados Water Authority. I'm the Director of Engineering at the Barbados Water Authority. Thank you for your question, and Minister, thank you for the opportunity to respond. As the Minister correctly said, we have made some changes to the zoning policy in Barbados. So with regard to this specific service or request, we would have to look at that and advise the person what exactly they are allowed to do within that particular zone. We have to go by the regulations, and sometimes you have situations where persons are on like opposite sides of the road, but because of the boundaries of the particular zone, we are not allowed to supply them with the service. But we will have to look at the specific incidents or application that you're referring to, and provide some feedback to that customer.
Just as a follow-on to Mr. Leslie, I think it is important also to point out that while we guess at this point you can speak to someone from the Barbados Water Authority to get the specifics, the intention in terms of the way forward in the legislation is actually to be able to allow you to identify the geographical location on a map, and that will also inform you as to what the requirements are legally in relation to a particular zone. So I think that will perhaps help a lot of individuals to be able to know exactly what to do and how to do it and how they will be affected. So I look forward to that obviously coming in place so that persons, like the Honourable Member is referring to, will have greater certainty in terms of their status in the particular areas.
Thank you, Minister. My final question. Malvern Tenantry Road, the depot would have started construction work on that road, but they're waiting to have the galvanized pipes changed to the poly blue, and there is a tree that is basically in the way that they're supposed to get cut down. Is there any way that I can have some updates on that? And Chair, there's also some flooding at a road in Messiah Street. That is not a question, that's a statement. Thank you.
Thought that was a follow-up question.
Thank you, Minister. As to the best of my knowledge, Malvern tenantry is actually in progress. I'm going to ask Mr. Philip Tudor, the Deputy Chief Technical Officer, to perhaps address your specific concerns in terms of the trees, and also Mr. Charles Yearwood to address you in relation to the issue of, Mr. Bowen, sorry, Mr. Yearwood is not here, to address you in relation to the issue of the flooding.
Yes, good morning, honorable members. Yes, we have started Malvern. It's coming along fairly nicely. The situation with the tree is that we will
Officer, I hate to interrupt you, but once you're speaking for the first time, for the record of Hansard and those viewing, please indicate your name and your specific title.
Yes, my apologies. My name is Philip Tudor. I'm Deputy Chief Technical Officer for Operations in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources. Right. With respect to the question about the tree, our tree trimming guys have been more or less heavily involved or heavily engaged in cutting trees throughout the island. But I would imagine that within the next week, within another week or two, the tree at Malvern will be cut and removed. I can't speak to the Water Authority Service. I believe that will be a member from the BWA to answer that question. Thanks.
Honourable
Yes,
Member.
Member for St. John, as it relates to the changing out of the galvanized pipe to polyblue, we invite Mr. Charles Leslie, the Director of Engineers, to address that particular question.
Good morning again. In relation to the changing of the pipe at Malverton, the Barbados Water Authority has been working along with the Ministry of Public Works, and as they come to the particular roads and we recognize that the services need to be changed or the mains need to be changed, we are doing that. So within the coming week or weeks, we will be facilitating that change out of the galvanized line to a larger line and burying it along the edge of the road. And that's a program that we are also embarking on. We are looking at the changing out and restructuring the services that go into some of those areas where we have a lot of unburied polyblue lines. As the road projects come along, we work along with them to regularize all of that to ensure that once the road project is completed, that pipe work is completed as well. So we'll be working along with the ministry to facilitate that.
Jason Boyne, Deputy Chief Technical Officer for Design Services. With regard to the flooding at Messiah Street, the Drainage Division is aware of the flooding. We are currently assessing that area and to develop the appropriate solution, and we will work hand in hand with our operations department to address that issue shortly.
Thank you, Chair. My three.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to ask the ministry a few questions. I want to start by saying that to the minister and the ministry that I acknowledge that this is an extremely hard-working ministry. All ministries are hard-working ministries, but some are more hard-working than others. And I recognize it's a very serious ministry because it touches some of the vexing issues of the public of Barbados. I will notice from wearing another hat that you're responsible for roads, streetlights, drainage, water authority, transport, a lot of the issues that are very vexing from time to time. And while I would not want to turn this into Parliament speaks, as we've had our parish speaks, there are some serious questions I need to ask the ministry. And the first one is really about how do you rationalize and set a timetable for roads and road repairs? And the reason I ask that is because I believe that we do need to have a kind of timetable so that we can give our residents some reasonable expectations. because we will all acknowledge that all the roads cannot be fixed at the same time. We do not want additional taxing. We complain when the government borrows. We have to increase our earnings, but we can't do all the roads at the same time. Specifically, when I look at Program 510 in the estimates, the draft estimates here, sub-program 495, 10 and 3 roads, I see $714,000. I don't know what that is intended for. When I look at sub-program 51, residential roads, I see $1 million. Sub-program 530, road rehabilitation, I see $1.6 million. And I'm not an engineer, I'm not a road builder, but I have an idea of what it takes to do roads. So I'm wondering what is the rationalization and process timetable, and how do we allocate the funds? I didn't want to get too parochial, but parochial is what put me here. So I move really from that national type of question, and I wrap this question in, Mr. Chair. I would like to know if this financial year we can have the Kensington New Road, a new road, because that is a road that causes significant problems, not just for the city of Bridgetown, but it's a major artery going from the Fondabelle area to the Baxters Road area. And the residents out there have indicated to me that the situation has deteriorated in such a way that they are now getting ill. They are now, feeling the pain of living in that area, and those who have to traverse it, like our Muslim and Indian community, 5 times a day to attend the mosque, but generally speaking as well. And they said to me, and they make it known in the house, they don't want any more talk, phone calls, site visits, defensiveness. They want a solution. When I visited with the Honourable Prime Minister, the Minister and your team on November 29th, the Prime Minister asked for a second opinion from drainage. I want to know if that second opinion has arrived as yet. And basically, if in this financial year, I beg, I plead, I demand to know if in this financial year that we can have some solutions to that particular situation.
Thank you, Minister. I share in your frustration, particularly because you have a way of sharing with me your frustration quite often. And to address your first question in relation to how we settle the timetable for road repairs, I will ask Mr. Philip Tudor, the Deputy Chief Technical Officer, to go into more details in terms of what the technical officers do in assessing the roads. But suffice to say, I think it is important for me to give perhaps an overall perspective. There are a lot of roads that right now are in need of major road rehabilitation, or in some cases, reconstruction. I would have highlighted in my opening that we had a situation where a number of roads were, for the most part, neglected. And Mr. Trudeau can speak to it. He has spoken publicly regarding it before. As it relates to the allocation of resources in previous years, prior certainly to us coming into office, the allocation was just simply not sufficient to be able to deal with the major infrastructural works that were needed across the country. And there was a cherry picking that was done of which roads were facilitated to be done. As a consequence, we have seen the deterioration now of more roads in a sense than the ministry can often handle. On coming to office and recognizing obviously that we inherited a situation as well where a pothole was seen as a transitory inconvenience, we embarked on an aggressive program to obtain foreign financing to assist us with our capital works program for road rehabilitation. It has meant that we have had to prioritize what I consider the really bad roads, while at the same time we know that there are still roads that are deteriorating while those roads are being addressed. So we've touched the global roads, which are roads which are obviously heavily trafficked. Those were part of the IDB program. We came to office in 2018. Those roads have been selected since 2016. So if you look at the time frame within which it took for us to even start the commencement of the work, it was 2 years of further deterioration of not only those existing roads, but another set of roads that came on stream that equally required rehabilitation. And I have no doubt that Kensington New Road got lost somewhere in the mix in terms of the rehabilitation of that particular area. It also has meant that we have had to look at and I know Mr. Tudor will speak to the feedback from MPs in terms of the concerns of residents. We've had to look at the assessments that have been done on the roads. I think the last report, which was a partial assessment, highlighted what every Barbadian knows, that the roads are generally in poor condition, and hence why we had to go out and get the financing. But it means that the financing cannot do everything. And I think that that is something that Barbadians also have to come to grips with, that we are trying our best to place the pothole, do the pothole patching on roads that really should be rehabilitated, that we have more finances than we had before, but they are still limited in relation to how far they can stretch. And therefore, the prioritization that is taking place is also affected sometimes by when we do the same thing, the parish speaks or the rubbing shoulders, because oftentimes we encounter concerns within communities where then something else has to be reprioritized because of the impact that we are hearing, firsthand is happening to residents. And so I say to you, Minister, and to my colleagues, that I do appreciate the urgency to have all roads in your communities done. I too myself would like several of the roads done in my community, but I have had to take a similar approach and to try to prioritize what roads really need doing, as opposed to those that can wait a bit longer. And therefore, I'm mindful that in this financial year, with the assistance too of the IDB, we've been able to utilize some technology that will allow us to capture, for I think the first time in real time, the condition of roads across the island, and to address your concern that the public needs to be able to better appreciate what the ministry is really doing. It shouldn't be that the public stumbles on which roads we are doing, but rather that you can see quarter by quarter in any financial year which road work programs we are actually able to execute. I will say though, and I must be honest, because that is what I've been sent here to do, sometimes even with the best intentions of the ministry to submit requests for funding for particular roads, sometimes the amount of monies are cut. And the PS certainly can speak to that in greater detail. Now, that obviously it addresses the issue of the fiscal space, whether the Ministry of Finance has the funds to be able to disburse at that particular time. But I have said to the ministry that regardless of whether we have the finances available, we have to ready ourselves to make the assessments of the roads across the country, and to make sure that we are ready once funds become available to be able to execute. My last point, Minister, would be that we are operating in a different environment now, where we don't have the luxury of waiting till the end of the first quarter to see the first disbursement of money. What we have to do is to recognize that first quarter, which begins in the 1st of April, presents some challenges if we don't see the funds quite early on. And simply put, it means that if we are to execute the programs before the climate change issues impact the country, then perhaps the Ministry of Finance needs to take a deeper, closer look at how it allocates funds to the Ministry of Public Works. Because by June, July, we're in the throes of the hurricane season, and a lot of the work that we would want to do is then obviously impeded, because we obviously do not have the luxury during the rainy season of doing a lot of the roads. So I hope that gives you a wide perspective of what are some of the issues we are grappling with. I'm going to ask Mr. Tudor to come in to deal with the specifics of the quarterly allocations and how he actually prioritizes the road program.
Yes. In terms of the quarterly allocation, what usually happens, first of all, we determine what roads we are going to do. The roads to be done are based on inputs from the parliamentary representative for the area, the residents of the area, the officers who are responsible for the area, and sometimes we get files and other correspondence indicating that road A or road B needs to be done. What we do then is just go out and do estimates for these roads. We ourselves, RQS, does some of the estimates, and we also get quotations from contractors to do particular roads, right? Once we know the allocation for the financial year, we then break down and see what roads there's money, what roads can be done during that financial year. And then we break it down into, further break it down into quarters. Because, for example, in tenantry roads, there's about $644,000 allocated to for road rehabilitation on the tenant road for. So what we do is look at the tenant roads that we have, the list of tenant roads, the costing, and then break it down into quarters. Now, obviously, we can't ask for all $644,000 a one go. So you will see in the first quarter we have, for example, Malvern Tenantry is $174,000, and then the next road is Rock Hall Tenantry for the next quarter. So we break it down into quarters like that, and hopefully we get fairly close to, we might go over the amount of money allocated, but we try to stay within the allocation that we will be getting from the Ministry of Finance. And the similar thing happens with the residential roads. We identify all the residential roads that we've received complaints about, and we do estimates for it, and then break it down into quarters. Now, the third quarter, which is October to December, we don't usually use as much money during that quarter because you recognize that is the rainy season, and you don't always get to do the amount of roads you would like to do within the rainy season. So we usually ask for less money during the third quarter than the other than the other 3 quarters. We like to front load the works. In other words, we want to do as much between April and June, July and September, right? And then we have January to March, which is the last quarter. We try to do as much as we can in those quarters, recognizing that in the third quarter, we may have some challenges as it relates to hurricanes and bad weather. So that is how we generally come up with the program on a yearly basis. In terms of the Kensington New Road, now, the drainage aspect in Kensington New Road is not an easy fix. It has been there for years, and as you said, we had a tour with the Prime Minister, I think it was in November, and basically she indicated that a thing needs to be done, a comprehensive plan needs to be done for Kensington New Road, because we have drainage problems that don't only originate in that area, but we have drainage problems coming down from Barbies, and all other surrounding areas and ending up in that area. So a comprehensive plan has to be done that would encompass Kensington New Road to take care of that problem. Right? It's not an easy fix. Another issue on that road is that the drains are usually flat. There's no elevation that would cause the water to travel fairly freely. So you will find our guys having to go in there periodically and clean the drains, because the drains are so flat that you get debris settling quite frequently in that road. So a comprehensive program has to be done that would allow Kensington New Road not to have the problems that it experiences right now. I don't know if that answers your question.
I just wanted to come back in, Minister, as well. I think the point that Mr. Tudor made needs to be fleshed out a bit more. It is not an easy fix to do Kensington New Road. I think that's what he's saying. But equally, as a ministry and as a government, we can't do nothing at all. One of the issues that has been raised to me certainly has been the issue of the disposal of garbage, because even through the drains, we end up having a situation where Barbadians, not necessarily within the city alone, but outside, are contributing as well to the issue of the backup of drainage. And I know you call me from time to time to ensure that the drains are pumped, and we constantly have to respond, but it also requires, it's not just a government approach that has to be looked at, it's a whole of society approach where individuals also need to take responsibility for their actions. They need to realize that what they do in an area which is perhaps nowhere near Kensington New Road is also having an impact on communities like Kensington and other places within the city. And therefore, once we understand that we're not in this alone, then I think that we can start to perhaps encourage through public education the persons within the city, but across the entire country, about the impact that their actions are having on others. I think the other point that I would want to take from what Mr. Tudor has said is that it is a multifaceted approach that has to be taken in relation to the drains. There's also the issue of sewage. There's also the issue of water, and then all of the other utilities as well. And so it is not a straightforward approach. It is one that I know in terms of how we deal with the utilities meetings, where we meet with all of the utilities, there has to be a coordinated approach. And we've given the assurance, obviously, that we will address Kensington New Road. We will obviously be doing some work in the area in relation to the sewage systems. And I suspect that when that is being done, rather than going in and digging up the road now, and then you will be calling me as well to complain, and so will the residents, we have to do a holistic look at how we can really reduce or alleviate the problems within the Kensington New Road area. So I hope that that clarifies the position of the ministry.
Mr. Chair, I'm not asking another question because I want to get one of the last questions answered. And I want to agree with the DPM that you can't get all the roads fixed, and that's why they asked about all the roads. Now, I would love all the roads fixed, and at the risk of some residents feeling and focusing on one road. The reason I'm focusing on this road is because of the safety issue, the roads collapsing, the people dropping into the drains, and most importantly, people's children getting sick. So therefore, I believe that that should be a reason that this road now be prioritized. And the question that I ask is there a solution in this financial year, or do people have to wait 12 to 18 months more in another financial year to see a solution? I did not expect an easy fix. I did not come here for an easy fix. But what I'm asking those of you who have the training, what is the solution, and how soon can my constituents expect that solution?
Thanks, Minister. I'm going to ask Mr. Charles Leslie to just speak to it, because in terms of, as I said to you earlier, looking at a more holistic approach, that is what we're doing when we address the issue of sewage in the area. The sewage is also going to affect how we deal with the road infrastructure and how we deal with the drainage. So I would just ask Charles to just address you, Minister.
Good morning again. As the Deputy Prime Minister would have indicated, each time we are addressing the roads now, we normally have a coordinated approach at our utilities meeting. And what we do is we include all of the partners or all of the stakeholders from the various ministries or utilities or service providers who would have a stake in basically upgrading that particular project. I believe in the Kensington New Road area, we have to work along with the ministry. There are going to be water services in there that we will have to replace and reposition so that they could do the drainage works that are necessary for that area. We will also have to do an assessment of the sewage or sewer lines in that particular area to ensure that if they need rehabilitation, that is done prior to the commencement of the road works. So it is a coordinated approach that has to take place between all of the ministries, and the Barbados Water Authority will be working along with the Ministry of Public Works to be able to deliver that particular road to the constituents in that area once we are requested to do so.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the second question is related to Program 516, Sub-Program 524, and that is the provision of traffic and street lighting. Now, both in the residential area and the capital city area, I get a lot of complaints, letters, concerns, and my own observation of a lot of dark areas. Not only does this present issues of aesthetics, it presents issues of safety. And we've had a number of situations, I believe, that could have been avoided with the provision of street lights. Now, I know some of the constraints, again, may be in relation to finance and funding and what is owed and what is not owed. But I see for this financial year, we have $6 million allocated. And I would like to know, if not exact figure, how much of this is for ensuring that the capital city, that all of our constituents here traverse from time to time, and would like to do so in a safe manner.
Thanks, Minister. I'm going to ask the PS to respond to you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable members. My name is Mark Cummins. I am the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Transport Works and Water Resources. And allow me to thank the honorable member for his question. Honorable member, we have in Barbados, that's a quick global, 31,000 streetlights. 31,000 streetlights. We just got an image from a pilot of KLM that showed Barbados, and in my opinion, obviously there's no hard scientific research, but we're probably one of the better lit countries in the world, right? Now, St. Michael, we have 7,500 streetlights in Barbados. 7,500 streetlights in St. Michael, but we go a little further than that. This is what we pay the Light and Power for, because we pay approximately $425,000 in Barbados every month for street lighting. We have an additional 28 street lights in Bridgetown. So these are lights outside of the normal street lights that we would pay to Barbados Light and Power. Also, the Barbados Tourism Management Inc., BTIA, they also pay some of the street lighting. I agree with you, Honourable Member, that we need to improve the street lighting in the city, especially on the eastern side of the city as we go towards the Constitution River Terminal and that walkway. And I'm a big believer in designing out crime through lighting. So this $6 million is pretty much going to help us to pay the existing bills. But there was a program where the ministry benefited significantly when Senior Minister Duguid was minister and Minister Abrams was Minister of Energy, where we were beneficial when the 85 to 88% of the sodium lights were changed out to LED. Now we are paying an interim rate for the LED. We're waiting for the final FTC ruling with respect to the Barbados Light and Power and see what the true cost will be of an LED lamp. So that $6 million may be enough, or we may have to come back for a supplementary. But I would strongly suggest that when it comes to the capital city, and not only our capital city, but this is a UNESCO World Heritage City, that the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Tourism, because they are now embarking on the Bridgetown walking tour, and I'm sure they will have tours at night. And also BTIA, that we come together and look at those areas under the guidance of our government electrical engineering department, because we also have a direct responsibility for some lights. And obviously with yourself, so that you can identify some of those areas to us that you consider to be still dark and in need of additional lighting, so we can see how best we can enhance the lighting in the city, utilizing some of this funding, and maybe getting funding from some of those other agencies. But I do take the point that we need to improve the lighting in Bridgetown, but I wanted to give the global picture in terms of when you see that $6 million there, because that is not only 31,000 street lights. As I was telling somebody last week, those fish lights that you see in Oistins, we also pay for them. We pay for all the 27 traffic signals and the walk signals that are lit. So the ministry does pay a very significant amount of money in the area of street lighting, and also for our traffic light infrastructure. I hope I have answered your question, but certainly that there is a solution where we can work together to improve the lighting in the city.
Thank you very much, PS. You did answer the question, and it is that there's no funding really to put additional lights in the city. Because when I calculate the bills and by the month, the year, that gives me $5.1 million, which means we have like $900,000 remaining, and we know how the fuel clause can cause the cost of light to escalate. I have sought my own solutions by purchasing solar lights, and I can't do it anymore. So I will have to turn to some of the other members who may be a little, more financially strong in order to continue to do so. I hear some laughing, but I continue. I was going to ask to claim my time for my quick measures in the past, Mr. Chair, but looking at every member having their board on, I really want to be sensitive to the other members and ask
Please
my final question. And my final question is in relation to strategic goal number 11, and I quote, to provide wastewater treatment and disposal services to the sewered areas of Bridgetown and in the South Coast. So my last question really is about the sewage. And we would appreciate that in the third decade of the 21st century, we have a number of residents across Barbados, but particularly in the area of the city, still using pit latrines, outside toilets, pit toilets. And this is something that we have committed to put behind us once and for all. I was in discussions with the ministry throughout last year and throughout the financial year, and my understanding is that this would have been really addressed next month. I'm hearing from the parliamentary secretary that we are still in the planning phase, and I really want to know when we can change the gear and move into the implementation phase. So my question here, Mr. Chair, is that in this financial year, what is the timetable for those 750 households or more awaiting to have the dignity of proper toilet facilities? Can I have a direct response to these human beings that is requiring a solution in the area of sewage?
Thank you, Ms. Minister. Let me just say to you that I'm not sure where you heard this notion of that things were going to be done shortly. I know that we have met with you. We've met with the Honourable Member for St. Michael East and the Honourable Speaker because we've been looking at the areas of the Bellevue Alley, Chapman Lane in relation to sewering. These are long-standing issues that have certainly predated myself, and certainly I grew up hearing about the issues of sewering in these areas. I believe at this point, I think it is fair to say that we are further advanced than we have ever been. We've had the community engagement with the MPs for the areas. We've had their team of persons come in. We've had people trained. We have engaged the consultants who are working on the project. Those persons have gone into the communities with some of the teams associated with the MPs to be able to start the conversation with the residents about the changes that will have to be made in terms of gathering information, but also the sewering systems that are being proposed. I'm going to ask Mr. Leslie to go into more details in relation to the actual sewering projects, particularly as you referenced Chapman Lane, but I just wanted to put a context because I think it is important that the country appreciates that we have taken a decision as a cabinet that this is of major concern to us as well. It is not just, you are late in the game, but the Honourable Member for St. Michael East has been crying out for the sewering issues to be addressed in his districts for a number of years. And we have certainly, during my tenure, been focused on ensuring that we walk this project through. As you can appreciate, there are lots of concerns about our actions as a government as to whether these people, these 700 people, deserve what we are attempting to do to improve their lives, as are the people in the Bailey Alley and the other districts. But we believe as a government that we are here to improve the lives of people. And regardless of whether they have pit toilets or otherwise, whether they are squatters, it is our focus and certainly our mandate to ensure that we are, while we're building great structures, we also have a responsibility to improve the living conditions and the social conditions of people across this country. Mr. Leslie, if you can.
Good morning, DPM. I'll ask Dr. John Wanzer to facilitate this answer. Thanks.
Hello, good morning, Chair. My name is John Wanzer. I'm the technical advisor to the BWA. With regard to Chapman Lane, which actually stretches to include the Kensington New Road, we have engaged the services of consultants who are actually currently trying to finalize the conceptual designs for sewer in that area. One of the situations we had was where to locate a lift station We were working with the Ministry of Housing, but eventually we found an alternative location close to the Chapman, the Bridgetown Sewage Treatment Plant, where we'll be able to locate the lift station. Those conceptual designs would now be submitted to the subcommittee of cabinet for review so that they can then proceed to do the final designs. We were advised that with regard to Chapman Lane, we should work in tandem with the work that is going to be done for upgrading the Bridgetown Sewage Treatment Plant, so that that work is done together and the disruptions are done one time. We're just now trying to finalize the funding for the Chapman Lane works. I know since I'm here, I might as well speak to the other two areas, which is the Bell Tenantry, Bellevue, where the conceptual designs again have been completed, and that will be submitted to the technical subcommittee as soon as we resume the meetings after the estimates, and we should be able to proceed with those. That applies to Belize Ali as well in St. George. With regard to Belize Ali, Chapman, Bridgetown, Bell Tenantry, as well as Bellevue, we are looking to hopefully finance those using the GSC funds.
I will close here, Mr. Chair, but before I do so, I want to make this a document to the House, a correspondence from the 7th of July, 2020, and it is the Barbados Water Authority seweraging of Chapman Lane and environs frequently asked questions. Question number 3, how soon will this project start? And it says investigatory and planning work is expected to commence in the month of July 2020. The construction activities should start around May 2023. I make that a document in the House and I yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
I think just in response to that, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure it wasn't a question, but I do think that the explanation given by Dr. Mwanza highlights the fact that work is ongoing. And therefore, I am sure that whatever was intended in terms of 2020, that you can now see that we are a lot closer in terms of actual investigations. And we had to do social surveys. And we're very sensitive going in and asking people questions about how they are living. It is not something that this administration takes lightly. It's certainly not something that I take lightly. And we had to make sure that we had to train persons to be able to go in to ask the questions. And I know that surveys have been done before, but I can say to you that this occupies the attention of the Paralsec and myself and the entire team. Every 2 weeks on a Wednesday we meet, and this is high priority on our agenda. And therefore I give you the assurance, and so also to the other MPs who I'm sure have similar concerns about the when, that we are on track to be able to move towards the designs, and obviously to do the tendering, to be able to move to the next stage, which is obviously moving in to alleviate some of the challenges that these persons are having.
Thank you, Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be very direct because I know that there are several questions for this head. And I'm going to start with the issue of road rehabilitation. And Minister, you said something that was very instructive to me, either in one of your responses or in your opening. One of the things you said, perhaps just in passing, was we're trying to do pothole patching on roads that should be rehabilitated. Now, that suggests to me that we're going to have some problems Because if we're saying that because of the availability of resources, that we are having to implement suboptimal solutions. So we have roads that we know need to be rehabilitated, but instead we're having to patch them. Then I suspect that that is going to mean that you're going to have to expend other resources sooner than you thought, because the patching isn't going to last if this is a road that really needs further and more complete work. Minister, you are aware, and I'm sure that you've had conversations with all members in here about the various issues that we have. I think that the challenge that your sector has is that public goods infrastructure is really the landscape of a community. And while you may have these engineering approach to making choices about the rehabilitation of roads, the choice you actually have to make is a bigger choice. Because the choice that you will find that you have to make is whether you show communities that you're interested in their well-being. Let me tell you what I mean by that. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for a little bit of latitude because my questions will be short. What I mean by that is we have communities that we run the risk of having no or very little investment in them overall. So there may be no investment in road infrastructure. There may be very little investment in sporting activity and recreation. There may be very little investment in other kinds of social goods that people depend on. And then what happens is that you run the risk of having left behind communities. Because imagine if we don't invest in roads because they haven't been prioritized for some years, and then we don't invest in recreational facilities, and then another ministry doesn't invest in remedial education issues for some of the residents or work programs, then you have left behind communities. And it may not fall directly in your jurisdiction as a ministry responsible for roads, but I tend to think, as I outlined in some correspondence that I recently had cause to send on behalf of some of my constituents, we have some left behind communities, I fear, and I think that one of the early investments that you can make in some of these communities to show that you are not, in fact, leaving them behind, like the ones that I mentioned in the Halls Road area, Roberts Road, Bibby's Gap, Chase Gap, these very small residential roads, that these are communities that haven't seen much in the way of social good investment for some time. So while they may not come at the top of your chart in Mr. Tudor's estimation or Mr. Tudor's assessment, they are in need of attention. Mr. Tudor and I made news, I would say, a year ago on the question of the technique for patching. I don't mind being in such distinguished company for making news. But
Honourable
I'm getting to the question of the patching technique.
I don't mind in asking you to ask your question now.
So the question, so I'm asking the question. Mr. Tudor and I made news on that question last year. So in reviewing the patching that is being done currently, as I move through the constituency, in fact, I had cause to do this just 2 days ago. The question at that time had to do with whether you are just throwing the material down and using perhaps less advanced techniques for making sure they stay. And I think we got a bit of a confession that that was in fact what was being done and that that would be remedied. On examination, I found 2 days ago that the patching is still not being rolled out. So the material is being thrown down, it's not being packed. What happens within a matter of hours is that the rain or whatever else removes it. One officer mentioned that sometimes they depend on vehicles to be able to roll it out. If, Minister, you're saying that already you're patching roads that should be rehabilitated, and then even that patching is not adequately done, then I'm concerned that these resources represented in these estimates are probably not even being adequately used. Can you say, you and your officers say anything about where we have come since last year when I first raised the question of this inadequate patching technique, given that I've observed it even recently, and whether there are any plans in these estimates to procure the necessary equipment to make sure that this now becomes a thing of the past?
Thank you, Minister, for your many questions and comments in relation to how we actually rehabilitate roads. Again, I like to be very honest and very direct in terms of what I certainly have been dealing with in the ministry. And when I say that we are patching roads that ought to be rehabilitated, I do so not as an admission that we're doing something wrong, but simply to highlight the fact that if we don't do those things, then we're going to have an even greater outcry from the residents across communities while we wait on much needed funding to become available to actually do full rehabilitation or reconstruction. I know that you have spent some time within the Ministry of Finance and Economic Investment, so you're well aware that while you speak about social good and being able to improve communities, again, a lot for ministries depends on the fiscal space that central government has, and in turn that is handed over to the ministries to do the magnitude of the work that they have to do. So I know that you say it, but you are saying it now from a position perhaps more as MP and not necessarily as a minister, whereby obviously the lens through which you look at this, the perspective is obviously a little bit different, and I appreciate that totally. But I do want to make the point that we have taken an approach to do the roads under the CAF program, under the IDB program, to again start to look at roads, obviously in the Scotland district, because you can say that the Scotland district was a forgotten area for many years. We were able, through your assistance as well, to aggressively go after financing to be able to help to bring relief to some of those communities, and that obviously is in progress. So I think I get you in terms of forgotten areas, but I think that we have done remarkably well in acquiring financing for some of the forgotten areas at a certain level, and perhaps what we have been trying to do with the limited resources that have been made available to us is to at least bring some relief in those communities. When I mention that comment, I must tell you that we were doing a retreat recently, and when I asked the depot heads about the conditions of the roads and what they're actually dealing with, they were the ones who simply said, Minister, a lot of times we are patching roads that ought to be fully rehabilitated. But they themselves also appreciate the constraints that we have as a ministry, and obviously they are, again, trying to not have MPs and residents obviously running them down to fix large potholes in communities. So I appreciate their honesty as well. But I think that on the wider point of how we patch, this is an area that we have been looking at very closely, just as we have in terms of new technologies. The fact that it actually brought me to a point when we were in our retreat to going home the night and actually looking at the different techniques for pothole patching. Because as you know, there's one way of doing it where you put it on the back of an open back truck, and the guys obviously don't necessarily want to stay doing that type of work for very long, so you find that the work gets done very quickly and not necessarily very well at times. You also have the pothole patching machines, which is a lot cleaner, and in this year's estimates we have been able to budget for an additional 2 pothole patchers to be able to assist with the efforts of the pothole patching team. Now, I cannot say that equipment alone is the solution. I do feel, and I've seen it across the ministry, that we have to pay attention to standards, that whether it is pothole patching, whether it is putting down some boulders to block off an area, as was alluded to in the St. Peter Speaks meeting, we have to look at how we do what we do and to have a standard across the depots that people can say, okay, well, the ministry is consistently doing things in a particular way. But what we have sometimes is a slapdash approach, whether to pothole patching or to blocking a road or to any other area within the ministry by some people, not all of them, but some people, which is an area that I am mindful that we have to train and retrain and retool people in order to be able to do things things better and to use the techniques better. So to answer your question, quite simply, once we have the funds, we can basically execute the programs in a lot more forgotten areas. I think that one of the challenges in terms of identifying the forgotten areas, obviously, is that, the MPs submit list of lots of areas, and it sometimes becomes very challenging for the ministry staff, in particular the technical team, to prioritize, because you want to send in as an MP every single area within your district. But what I have asked MPs over the last year certainly to do is to prioritize. Let us know what are the areas that you consider to be in the worst condition, or the ones that are forgotten, that perhaps we may need to address. And if we have the extra materials at our disposal, then we can ask the depots to go in and to assist with those types of work. So again, I extend that invitation to you. If there are specific areas that Mr. Tudor has not responded to you on, feel free to send me a message so that I can certainly prompt him and the rest of the depots to address. Mr. Tudor, I don't know if you want to speak specifically to any of the other areas that the Honourable Minister has raised.
I just wanted to say that two things are needed: retraining of the folks who are responsible for patching these potholes. The last time I did training with these guys was about almost 15 years ago. So retraining needs to be done, and the officers need to have a better appreciation as to the correct procedure as it relates to patching the potholes. Secondly, we have, I think it's 4 pothole patchers right now, and we are going to, as Deputy Prime Minister said, we are getting another 2. So that would improve the fleet considerably. These pothole patchers are special pieces of equipment. They all have the tampers to compact the hot mix once it's put in the hole. It has the jackhammers to square up the hole and remove all the loose material. So it has everything within it, these pothole patchers. So they're more or less designed for that purpose. Currently, what we have been using is patching trucks, where the patching trucks go to the plant, collect the mix, and the guys put on the mix in the potholes using shovels, and sometimes using the back of a shovel to thing, which is, as you appreciate, it's totally unacceptable. So 2 things have to be done: retraining of the staff, as well as the implementation or further implementation of the pothole patching machines that were designed for that purpose. As you said, a lot of the residential, particularly residential and tenancy roads, have been neglected. Luckily, we have the CAF program now, and we have the Complant program that have come on stream. That allows us to do that many more roads throughout the island. You can imagine that you have some tenancy roads and residential roads that will cost $1.5, $2 million to fix, when our budget for tenancy roads and residential roads are less than $1 million. So the challenge was always which roads do we choose to be fixed. However, with the CAF program, the Complant program, we are able to do many of the roads that we could not have done in the past. There are some roads that were built 30, 40 years ago that we've never gone back and touched, right? Ordinarily, a hot mix road should be rehabilitated within a 10-year period. When I say rehabilitated, I mean mill and paved or reconstruction. Some sort of intervention needs to be done after 10 years on most of these roads, right? So a lot of these roads have been neglected over the years. So hopefully, with the programs that have come on stream, CAF program, Complant program, we should be able to break back a lot of these roads that have been neglected in the past.
Thanks very much, Mr. Tudor. I always appreciate your honesty, but the reference that you made to correct training needed to be done was your response a year ago, which suggests to me that in the interim, we haven't done the training since we saw the potholes patched 2 days ago without the requisite technique. So I'm hoping that in these estimates, that training is contemplated. And just quickly, before I move to question number 2, Minister, in your response, you made reference to my prior dispensation as Minister responsible for Economic Affairs and Investment, and certainly in that capacity, I'm aware of all of the funding that we were able to secure for the ministry to do its work. But I am here always, and first as the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South Central. And every remark that I make, even having been in cabinet, is in that position because those are the people who have sent me here. And it is in that capacity that I have submitted a prioritized list of roads to be done that is with your ministry, and I look forward to being able to continue that discussion. I want to move then to the question of water access. And the parliamentary secretary mentioned the matter of there being 100 million, I think it was, in arrears of the Water Authority. My question has to do with the legislative framework within which the Water Authority does its business and is able to perhaps recover arrears or is able to make connections and therefore to provide water to all Barbadians. I gather that the challenge that you have is similar to the challenge that the Urban Development Commission has with respect to its work to be able to give provide waterborne facilities to Barbadians. And that is one of tying water access and liability for that account to land tenure. In 2018, when we came to service, and recognizing the issue with pit toilets that the member for the city of Bridgetown raised earlier, we determined to bring some resolution to that matter. I am aware that the Water Authority has some kind of interim dispensation where there's a procedure where a person makes a deposit, quite a large financial deposit, might I say, but in that way, one does not have to prove tenure or ownership of the land or the property, but one can make this deposit and have that stand in as an ownership issue. But I still feel that we have to settle this vexing issue of how do we make decisions about who gets water. Because if I've been on a property for 12, 15, 20 years, I believe that I am owed the dignity of a water connection and proper sanitation. And so I wanted to hear from you, and it really also affects the way that you are able to collect arrears. Because as your general manager well knows, I have recently had to raise issues that have to do with residents who want to clear arrears, but are being told they can't clear arrears because their name is not on the bill. As you prepare to answer, let me say that I am aware that legal issues always attend on these matters. I am further aware that as a Barbados Labour Party government, when we came to service in 2018, we purposed to find a way around or through or over these issues so people could have access to water. And so I want to say from the outset before you answer that I believe that there are some cases where good common sense has to replace bureaucracy. And so I want to hear from you, what are the plans to settle this vexing issue so that we can have appropriate water connection and sanitation for the people of Barbados?
Thank you, Minister. As you rightly said, the government has obviously been trying to address this very vexing issue for the last few years. There has been some relief, but of course, as with most things, the processes and the legal implications sometimes slow down the process. I am mindful that with the changes that we are going to be making at the Barbados Water Authority. The new chairman is also here. I suspect he may want to also touch on this, but I'm going to ask the chairman of the Barbados Water Authority to perhaps touch on some of the day-to-day issues, because I think what you are raising is more how the Barbados Water Authority responds to its customers and how it treats to its customers. And so I'll ask Mr. Halliday perhaps to respond first, and then if the chairman wishes to come in as well.
Mr. Chairman, David Wright, Chair of the Barbados Water Authority. In response to the question about the general activities of the Water Authority, I will pass that on to the general manager. But what I would want to comment and say to MP Carroll is that having now come into the position, what I do recognize that there is a bit of work to be done to, what I say, improve the operations and the fortunes of the authority. The new board, which I think is actually a very well board, the composition of the board, I think, is very good. I do congratulate the Deputy Prime Minister for that. I think we recognize we have a lot of work to do. And we had indicated to the Deputy Prime Minister that within, I think, a month or so, we will have for her and for Cabinet a very comprehensive program, a plan to ensure or give the guidelines or give the roadmap for what we think will be the next 3 years, where the fortunes of the authority can be reversed. I can only speak in such broad terms at this point in time, and as I've indicated before, since I've come into the position, I have been, my word, inhaling documents and information almost on a daily basis. But we are confident that based on what we've seen so far, that within a three-year period, hopefully no more than 5, we expect that we can see the authority in a sustainable position operationally. Because right now, its current financial position, its balance sheet is not the strongest, and I don't think it would it would take a magician, more or less, to improve that within a 3-year period where we can stand on our own feet. So I think if next year, if I'm here to answer a similar question, my God willing, of course, I think I can answer with even more, in a much more positive way as to what you can expect within the next 2 or so years from the authority. But we are confident that the fortunes can be turned around, and the board is working very, very hard to achieve that. But in respect of the daily operations, I will really want to ask the general manager to make his comment in that regard. Thank you.
I don't want to interrupt, except to clarify that my question is really about more on the legislative and policy side, the background against which you are making these decisions, rather than on day-to-day operational issue.
Thank you, Honourable Member. My name is Keith Roy Halliday, General Manager of the Barbados Water Authority. I also want to thank the DPM and our Chairman for their contribution, and I'll try my best to speak directly to your query, or queries rather. And though we spoke recently on 1 or 2 issues, or had an exchange, we did not get to speak specifically on the issue. At least the ones that you had raised prior, what I would say is that in support of legislative changes made, and in support as well, or in conjunction with that change that was made in 2018, that sought to repurpose how customers, residents particularly, could qualify for service connection in instances where they could not prove ownership. The indemnity form was, yes, introduced. But aside from that, or alongside that, we also have a credit policy that addresses unique circumstances, whether it is a leak, whether it is a faulty meter, whether it is a zoning issue. And more recently, we've extended it to deal with issues such as the one that you've raised, that sought to step outside of what we have dealt with traditionally, or what we see specifically as technical issues, and go into that space where some of the solutions may be more questionable. And that is why I'd wanted to also speak to you on that. So those particular issues, such as the ones you've raised, we have started to look at on a very specific case-by-case basis to make, as you would have pronounced, maybe a common sense type issue, or to use a common sense type approach to be able to react or to be able to deal with those issues. I can't say in all instances it will go the way that you may or anyone else may interpret, but I can assure you that a much more valiant attempt is being made to address several of those issues, and we've successfully dealt with a few of those already. So to the specific issues that you and I are aware, we are also addressing those and hoping for the opportunity to speak to you directly on that as well.
I thank you for your willingness to speak on those issues, but I'm afraid that I did not hear what I had hoped to with respect to what are the, and Mr. Chairman, this is just a repeat of the question, this is not a third question, with respect to the plans aside from the indemnity form and the credit issues for more permanently addressing the issue. Perhaps this is something on which the authority can reflect if there's no answer today. But I think that between the BWA and the Urban Development Commission, and we don't have the benefit of the Prime Minister's office in the well this year, although I am promised that we may be able to look forward to that in the future, given the over 180 million in expenditure in the estimates. I think that it is an issue that bears permanent solution, because the two agencies responsible for water, construction, infrastructure, sanitation face this every day. So if there's no response today, perhaps there's something on which to reflect. I want to come quickly to my final.
Before you move on, Honourable Member, I don't think that it's fair to say that there's no response. I gather that you have specific issues that you have raised with the Barbados Water Authority, because it's clear that Mr. Halliday obviously has certain knowledge of perhaps some issues specifically that you have raised. So without providing maybe the details of what you have written to the BWA about, I think my advice to you would be perhaps to follow up with Mr. Halliday to see if those specific matters can be addressed. On the wider policy issue, as I said before, we have obviously attempted to put things in place. If there are things that go beyond the boundaries of what is already in place, then that may also have to be done on a case-by-case basis, unless you have facts and figures as to how many other persons are affected, so that we can have a wider policy decision being taken. But I think, as you can appreciate, unless there are those facts and figures, I'm not one to make policy on the cuff. And therefore, I would want perhaps your representations through Mr. Halliday or through the Permanent Secretary, which would be the appropriate methodology to do so, so that perhaps as a cabinet, if it is something wider in terms of a broader policy, that we are able to have that ventilated in a way that we can then address the concerns that you've raised.
Thanks, Minister. I don't want to continue to yield my time in a back and forth on this, so let me just give a reminder. The Barbados Labour Party, as an administration, in defining our manifesto and our policy positions, purposed that we would consider tenure, time that a person has lived on a plot of land. As a matter of fact, the Urban Development Commission has implemented, I would say, an interim policy of considering the tenure of a person on a property to determine whether it would take a particular approach, even on the matter of waterborne facilities. And I don't think the Honourable Prime Minister would mind me making reference to things she has said on this matter. She has suggested that a waterborne facility, if permission has not been granted, can be torn down, if it comes to that. But this is not something that I have made up in my sleep last night. This is something that was purpose determined by a Barbados Labour Party, that we have to deal with these issues of water, land tenure, and sanitation. So these are not specific issues. It doesn't require facts and figures to tell you how many people are affected. The Barbados Labour Party, on coming to service in 2018, highlighted this as an issue. And so I will simply say, as a final word on this, that I look forward to us being able to give, to realize that policy position. Very quickly, coming to the last question. The issue of the work of the Transport Authority and the granting of licenses for certain kinds of public service vehicles is one that has enjoyed the public's attention, public discourse for all kinds of reasons that are well known to you, Minister. I dare say that the policy under the previous administration before we came to service was a little loose for reasons that only they can possibly understand. But this is a very simple question. I have constituents who come to me from time to time looking for clarity on the basis on which routes are awarded, licenses are given for people to operate on certain routes, and really the entire process of how this is determined. I ask this question because I think that they would benefit from some explanation of how these decisions are made, because I rely on the good judgment of the officers of the authority, but sometimes I tend to think that my constituents may not, having had the experience that they had in the past, where routes were granted based on perhaps nothing at all in a previous administration. It seemed to me, I'm less acquainted with this sector. But I think that they would benefit from understanding how this is done, whether there's some level of saturation currently, what can they expect, because these questions persist, and I think it would be good to have some explanation and transparency on how these decisions are made.
Thank you, Minister, for the member for the question. Let me just say before I ask the Director of the Transport Authority to enter the conversation, that prior to us coming to office, it was almost a free-for-all in terms of the issuance of permits. I think prior to the election, between I think the January and the May, we had a situation in 2018 where over 1,000 permits had been issued. And that, of course, required on our coming to office a certain level of regulation in terms of, as you highlighted, the issue of routes, the issue of, having to then deal with the fact that there were all of these persons who had received permits who had obviously legitimate expectations that now needed to be fulfilled. And so the authority over the last couple of years has obviously been working to regularize that. And so I will ask the director to be able to speak to it. Ms. Ruth Holder, please.
Yeah, sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Holder. I'm the Director of Transport Authority. Thanks, Member of Parliament, for your question. I will seek to address and answer it as best as I possibly can. And you're speaking in terms of the policy in relation to granting license. At the outset, I just need to put it in a little bit of context so that everybody understands exactly what happens in relation to license. License for public service vehicles in some sectors are determined by Cabinet. It's not determined by the Transport Authority, so therefore Cabinet sets the base in terms of what the capacities are in particular categories. The categories would be minibuses, route taxis, tour buses. Those are the big categories that we tend to get most queries or most questions on. As Minister mentioned, as Deputy Prime Minister mentioned, prior to 2018, there was a massive distribution of permits distributed to the point where I don't believe that there was any specific method in which the determination was made to distribute the permits. I don't believe there was any scientific study to determine which route we should put the permits on. And what we're seeing now is that we have an oversaturation, and what we consider to be oversaturation on particular routes. So for example, on the Spikestown, if you go Bridgetown to Spikestown, you'll probably encounter maybe 99 vehicles on that particular area alone. If you come on the South Coast now, and you look at from the Oistins, from the Bridgetown to the Oistins area, you get another 120 on that route. You get a little diversion when you go off to San Lawrence Castle or Silver Sands or Frey Valley. So there was no particular way in which the routes were distributed. So what we have now is an oversaturation of routes. We're also at a maximum capacity on those routes. So therefore, your constituents who are applying or who wish to apply, who have been denied permits, especially for route taxis and maxi taxis, is not because the Transport Authority cherry picks who we're going to give them to. It's just that we don't have any more in those categories. In relation to taxis and maxi taxis, we're almost down to the limit in terms of those categories. What we do as a result of that is that we try to interview as many people as we possibly can to determine who we believe, based on the interview questions, may be the best fit to give a permit in those categories. So the application process is a simple one. It's just an interview process that takes a lot longer because the demand is significant in terms of the applications that we receive on a daily basis. So I hope that answers your question and that of your constituents.
Thank you very much. Just finally to say that perhaps if the public could receive some figures on what that demand is like, they may better understand why the wait is so protracted. You don't have to say no, but I mean, if there's a way to be able to just make transparent, listen, we have this number of applications before us. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I have to say a word of thanks. You know, we are here to ask the probing questions, so I don't want that to suggest to the officers that we as members of parliament do not understand that they work with us to be able to fulfill the needs of constituents. We have a good relationship in St. Michael South Central with those officers who respond to us, and these questions of mine and others are really just to keep in mind the people that we serve and that we have to continue to be accountable to. So I thank the officers and the ministry for the relationship and for the ongoing work, and look forward to being able to serve our residents better in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central. We take a 5-minute break. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do not report leave to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requested leave to sit again. Honourable member saying James Central.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House be suspended for 5 minutes.
Do what then?
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
The question is that this honourable chairman will be suspended for 5 minutes. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. This honourable chairman stands suspended for 5 minutes.